These guys can go in there, they'll dry by the next time anybody's ready to use them. Glass waste for those guys. And I got a couple of things here from before. I'm transferring another solid. Tempting to put it right into the ice bath immediately, but when you do that, sometimes the compound oils out and traps the impurities. So the slower the cooling, the less likely that is to happen. So you can see that we've got a nice lot of yellow, pale yellow crystals forming, but it's still hot. I can take the beaker away now because the slow cooling has occurred and gotten us a nice looking crystal. So we just want to let that reach room temperature, and then we'll put it in the ice bath as well. You can see it's kind of one big chunk, so we'll have to break that up with the spatula in order to make it filterable. And maybe you can see that the crystals are fairly long, which is because they came out slowly. So it's nice quality crystals. Reach in there and swirl that up to suspend the crystals. Still a little warm. Could wait a bit before we got there. We'll grab a 50 ml beaker because we're going to be sitting that 10 ml beaker inside a 50 in the desiccator. I might as well pull out the desiccator too while I'm waiting. Nice looking solid. So we can now cool that in an ice bath just for a little while. Try to maximize our yield. If I could do this reaction over, I would now know that a 10 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask would have been enough, which would be easier to get the solid out without losing any on the walls. But didn't know ahead of time, not knowing what this compound is, how much it would take to dissolve it. It's probably good enough. I'm just wiping that so I don't get any extra water in. Wet the filter paper with a little bit of the cold ethanol. And then we want to try to pour all this out pretty quickly so it all comes out. Obviously we're losing a little bit. Drag that out of there with a glass rod, or not a glass rod, a spatula. You can see it's a really fine, almost pure white crystalline material. And rinse that flask down with a squirt of cold ethanol. And we don't want to use too much because we don't want to lose any solid, but make sure we try to get all of it. And then I'm just going to rinse just to see if I can get the last little traces of yellow color away with maybe 2 more squirts. Always a trade-off between getting it pure and losing it by dissolving it in your solvent. So that's good enough. We'll let that dry. The rest of the ethanol can go down the sink. Wasn't much left anyway. We'll just let air go through that for a little bit before we transfer it to this 10 ml beaker and put it in the desiccator. This just had ethanol in it, so it doesn't really need anything more than a rinse. And these little flasks just had pipettes and solvents in them, so that one, the other one had that was the one that we did the recrystallization in. You can see that it's a little cloudy, so that one I'll wash with soap. Got my spatula, or my tweezers rather, to hold that piece of paper with. And since it's going to go in the desiccator for a couple of days, there's no real need to let air go through there for a long time. We'll take our vacuum. Somewhere in there is a boiling stone that I'll have to remove. If it presents itself, I'll remove it now. Otherwise, it can be removed after this stuff is dried in the desiccator. You see, it's really kind of light, fluffy little mass. Almost looks like cotton candy. Except that it's white instead of gaudy pink. There's very little solid on that filter paper, so I'm going to leave the filter paper behind and not worry about the little tiny bit of solid that's on it. And there's our little cotton candy. I don't know where the boiling stone is. It's hiding in there somewhere. Break it up a little bit so that we have plenty of surface area for drying. I'm actually going to use that little bit to make up a mass spec sample. So let's mass this beaker. Obviously we'll have to mass it again once it's dry to get an accurate reading, but at least get approximate value. Looks like 9.024 grams. So we'll sit that beaker inside this other beaker. Just set that in the desiccator. Let that dry overnight. It really takes very little solid for a mass spec. So just that little bit of solid that's adhering to the glass there is probably enough. So I'm going to label this 62A. Oops. Label that with a pencil. And then we're going to dissolve it in dichloromethane for the GC mass spec sample. So I will fill that up with about 1.5 milliliters of dichloromethane just to the top line. And then we'll just take that spatula with a little bit of solid on it and swish it around in there. And then I've got a little bit more solid here on the walls of the funnel. Just going to scrape that onto the spatula. Dissolve it up as well. Very sensitive technique, requires a really dilute sample. Tiny little bit there. And there's a little bit of solid on the filter paper I can also collect. That should be plenty for a good GC mass spec. Give that a nice shake. This can go in the organic waste. It's mostly ethanol. And we'll take this guy over to the GC mass spec. I'm going to take the methylene chloride with me too in case the washing vial, or the washing vial on the auto sampler needs to be refilled. We can stick that in sample slot number 1. Just take a look and make sure there's still dichloromethane in the wash. Yeah, plenty. No problem. So we want to use the method Aldol 2021. That is in fact what's up here. Aldol 2021 got QGM. Right now it's pointing to a blank file. So I'm going to go to sample login and I'm looking at DCL-10 V-62A-1. And I'm going to call the data file the same thing. And this is the product of the Aldol condensation between K2 and B4. We're going to inject 0.2 microliters of this one, since it's a fairly dilute sample. It's in vial 1. My tuning file is the most recent. I'm having it integrate automatically. So we're going to OK that. And then we're going to download those parameters. And it will do its thing. And run. I'm not sure where. Hopefully it will come off within this 12 minutes run. But if it doesn't, we'll extend it. So it's setting the parameters, and I will turn off the camera and we'll just let it do its stuff.